There are two problems with the way we test cholesterol levels today. Plasma cholesterol levels, which is what clinicians measure with standard cholesterol tests, often have little to do with excess cellular cholesterol, especially artery cholesterol, which is what we really care about. And secondly, if your doctor only looks at one number, LDL, and it is going up, he may not realize that it's going up because armless LDL-A is rising, while the armful LDL-B is actually falling. And that could explain the findings of this recent controversial study published in the BMJ Open Journal. In this review of 19 studies involving 68,094 people, researchers have found no association between LDL, what has traditionally been considered bad cholesterol, and the premature death of over 60-year-olds from cardiovascular disease. Dr. Kendrick, the intermediate care GP who conducted the study, has found that 92% of the people in the study with high LDL levels lived longer and had less heart disease. The review received a lot of pushback from medical opponents who described the results as surprising and a disappointing unbalanced paper, on the basis that evidence from large clinical trials demonstrates that lowering LDL cholesterol slightly reduces risk of deaths overall and from heart attacks and strokes, without taking into account age. But there is no distinction between LDL-A and LDL-B being made here, and it could very well be that participants had elevated levels of LDL-A, which are neutral. 17 other international experts who wrote the review subsequently called for a re-evaluation of the guidelines on LDL reduction for cardiovascular prevention. At any rate, in order to get a more accurate reading of cholesterol levels that is really predictive of heart disease risk, doctors should ideally do this much more modern and useful test, which is called the particle test for cholesterol. But, given that this type of test isn't available to most people, people can turn to the fasting triglycerides to HDL ratio instead, which is probably a more important number presaging human health disaster and heart disease better than almost any other simple number you could get from a blood test without asking for an additional test. That ratio, obtained by dividing triglycerides by HDL, will predict the predominant particle size of your LDL cholesterol with great precision. Ideally, you'd want this ratio to be less than 0.87 millimole per liter. A ratio of 1.74 millimole per liter or more is, however, a pretty risky number. It is very hard to move the HDL number with lifestyle alone, but it is easy to lower the triglycerides with a low-carb diet, which will automatically improve your ratio and lower your risk for heart disease. Here, the authors of the report are stating that refined carbohydrates, particularly simple sugars and starches with high glycemic index, increase levels of the small, dense LDL, in other words, the more dangerous LDL-B. They then go on to say that low-carb diets have the opposite effect, in other words, reducing levels of LDL-B. Low-carb diets drop triglycerides like a rock the vast majority of the time because increased processed carbs and grains turns to sugar in a heartbeat, and sugar is what drives triglycerides up. Now, one of the best ways to up levels of the good or protective HDL cholesterol, in addition to exercise, is to add in some healthy saturated fat. Yes, healthy saturated fat, two words in the same sentence that 10 years ago used to be an oxymoron.